Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Hello, Cammy, my little square on my monitor. How are you doing?
Hi, Brian. How are you? I'm good.
I am doing good, too. Cammy, this has been a packed week. I'm loving it. Or packed month, sorry. I'm loving it. This is the continuation of our spooky-themed episodes. Spoopiness with two capital P's, spoopy. And it's great because this episode in particular is going to really flow well with the one that we did a year ago on Vlad the Impaler. Impala's a car. So if you're just joining us, you just clicked, you're bored, you don't want to listen to political podcasts, especially after that debate, you're with us now. What we do here on Mythstorie is every week we like to take a myth or a legend, and then we'll try and give you a little story, and then some of the facts behind that story or the discussion behind that story. And like we did a year ago, we talked about Vlad the Impaler, the very infamous in a lot of ways, and we found he was pretty run-of-the-mill ruler for Transylvania, the Baltic area. That was pretty common back then. And
he was like the Iphicles of rulers.
Well, yeah, he was run-of-the-mill. And Elizabeth Bathory is who we're talking about. And, you may know a little bit about her. I didn't. This is a little fun. She's definitely not as famous as Vlad, but she's pretty darn famous. She really is, because she's in a very similar state, just a couple hundred years after that. Now, we will say we're going to warn you, much like last week's episode, the Bathory story does involve killing, and in a gruesome way. She was accused, if you don't know, she was accused of murdering up to like 600 people, allegedly. I'll go behind some of the allegations later. But Cammy's story is wonderful as always, but it will be just, super. She's pulling all the Edgar Allan Poes out for this one, I think, right?
It's very graphic.
Yeah. So, and that's the stories of it all were. So just a heads up on that one. You might want to,
put your kids away.
Listen to the Yule episode. Skip ahead, just or go to our last Christmas episode. Just pretend that it's Christmas. No, anyway. All right. So, Cammy, let us know what Bathory was. Who was she? Regale us.
Okay. So my source was a web series called Serial Killer Culture, Season 2, Episode 4, Infamous Bathory. I do want to say that the web series in no way aligns with what I'm saying. They definitely don't demonize her in the way that the story is going to. But
don't worry, I have a redeeming sort of theory, but
okay. It began on an unremarkable day. Our countess was sick and thought to be dying from her ailment when a servant was brought to her to be punished for one indiscretion or another. The woman's breath had rattled and stopped, but when the countess's servant entered the room, she leapt from her bed and bit the girl's neck. The young servant crumpled to the floor, and Bathory raised her head to reveal her mouth and throat covered in fresh, dripping blood. Everyone who witnessed the event cowered, fearing they might be next. But the countess simply asked for a bath and went about her day as if she had not just suffered an ailment which kept her bedridden and put her so close to death. Whether this account proves she was an immortal creature or it just shows her cruelty, we cannot be certain. What we can know is that it created a bloodlust in her that would rival any vampire of legend. She began recruiting young women from the servant classes to come work in her castle as seamstresses and laundrywomen. Whenever the young women would mishandle a task, they would receive brutal punishment. Many died from the beatings. But her thirst for blood was not satisfied by brutal, torturous murder alone. One day, a servant girl was sent to help the countess get ready for a day. She drew her bath and started to brush her hair, but she was too rough, and Bathory's hair was pulled back painfully. She reacted with immediate anger and pulled her ring-filled hand back to strike the girl. She landed the blow, and the rings on her fingers cut the servant's face, the blood splattering onto her own face. And when she took a cloth to wipe herself clean, she noticed that the places where the blood hit were now youthful and radiant. She knew the secret to youth. a young woman's blood. She asked the servant to continue drawing her bath. She did exactly as she was told, fearing the consequences. Bathory stood over her and cut her throat so that the blood would drain into her bath, and then she stepped in it and bathed in the blood and water until the youthful glow covered her entire body. As well as this gruesome cure worked, the effect would only last for so long. Soon she was calling more and more young servant girls to work for her. They were happy to take a job in one of the grandest castles in the land. Little did they know that one by one, they would all mysteriously die of cholera. The king's court of the time thought it strange, but the truth was only known to her most faithful attendants, for they were the ones who had to prepare horrific remedy for the consequences of time.
Wow. Well, Cammy, I think I should ask, are you okay?
Yeah.
Was this some sort of like a transference of your emotions here? No, that's really good. I like that a lot. That was really cool. So, Elizabeth Bathory. This is, I'll set the stage here a little bit, the time period. So again, if you're familiar with Vlad the Impaler, Vlad was around, he died around 1477. And he was in the same area too, in Transylvania, Hungary, this very hectic Baltic region. This is a couple hundred years later. She died. The murders. The story happens really in 1602, and she goes on till 1610 is when she's like put in prison essentially, or house arrest, and then she dies in 1614. So not too far off of this figure. I kept wanting to see like, and Uncle Vlad was, I don't know, like some sort of reference to him, but no, I don't think there's any immediate reference. Again, this area, super hectic, and lots of different states interacting with each other. And Elizabeth and the Bathory, the family was very important. She was a Hungarian countess. Her family basically owned Transylvania. That's where their shtick was. They were very wealthy. Her uncle was the king of Poland at the time, so she was a very well-to-do person. And you've got her family's around. You've got the Ottomans on one side, constantly around this area doing stuff. I mentioned it during the Vlad episode how they were involved in that. And you've got Habsburgs. There's actually the Long War was this conflict that was going on at the time that it was called, and it was this. It's also called the Long Turkish War or the 13 Years' War. It's just sort of a land war between lots of different, like the Holy Roman Empire of the time, Hungary, Spain, all these sort of European duchies and things like that going against the Ottomans, and just kind of going back and forth on land and things like that. So it was a very hectic time, medieval to the core in a lot of ways. And Bathory, she led kind of a normal childhood. We know she was around doing what she did. They actually had really good records of a lot of this, and there was a pattern that again occurred between 1602 and 1604 with the murders. Now, she married into a rich family, and her husband he actually died in 1604. And this is where I kind of see not only that's when the main attacks are sort of happening, but in 1604, after his death, her husband had a magnate. It's also called a palatine, which is basically a medieval official. I read it as Palpatine first, and I was like, Star Wars. But this medieval official, Georgi Thurzo, he was a very powerful magnate, and he was under the service of her husband, and he was ordered eventually by the King of Hungary at the time to investigate Bathory, because it sort of came in waves, it looks like. Now, I remember when we talked about Vlad, we didn't have like definitive proof of everything he did. It so much of it came into legend, much like how Bathory is in a way. But people definitely died during this time. There wasn't a labor union. There wasn't a huge quality of life for anyone who wasn't a rich noblewoman. Well, anyway, so 1602, 1604 is when they think that these killings, many of these killings happened as they did. And once sort of the investigation happened, it wouldn't be until 1610 when it actually kind of went to court. A minister complaint in court in 1610 collected evidence from over 300 witnesses. And these allegations included beatings, mutilation, starvation, accusations of cannibalism was kind of the crazy thing. Bathory had a gyneceum, a women's house, basically.
Okay.
I think like gynecologist. But it is the story. The significance of the story is that she did kill young women, young servant girls, is sort of what it is, and that would kind of make sense. That's who she would have an abundance of, is likely women coming to work in the castle and things like that. And she had several estates all throughout the area, so like we can kind of see the thin lines and things like that. But what's weird is that Bathory, she during the Long War, there's records of her helping widows and victims from it, and assisting, evidence of Bathory assisting destitute women through all these conflicts, because Bathory during the Long War, before her husband died, actually was in charge of his estates on the way to like the pathway to Vienna, essentially. And so she was a very active noblewoman, and a lot of displaced people from these conflicts, and she, it looks like she would specifically really go out and help the women. So it's weird that there's this that it goes into this when she has a history of it.
What class were these women? Like, do you think it was a class issue?
No, I don't think so. They wouldn't have been. I think you would have had like kind of a hodgepodge, but it would have been like the peasantry, essentially, the working class at the time. It notes that she helped women that were pregnant due to rape from the conflicts and things like that as well. And so I think she really, I don't know. It seems like she really was kind of a better noblewoman until you get to this stuff. Everything seems fine. And we think of, like, you can think of almost any noble person pre 19th century, 20th century even, and you can kind of expect them to just be like horrible people. You think of like crazy French kings and stuff like that, but there wasn't like a bunch. Even in her childhood, the Wikipedia talks about how she may have suffered what could have been epilepsy, but she didn't have a lot of crazy things. A rumor after her death came up that she got pregnant when she was 13 from like a stable boy, and then had to give the baby up and stuff like that. But all that stuff happened after her death, and that was sort of like just a gossipy kind of thing, as well as like, so when you talked about the bathing in the blood story, that definitely did start to happen. But the legend itself, the legend of her, came from a Jesuit scholar, Tragica Historia, and it was the first written account of the Bathory case. This was in 1729, and there were some other books as well. From other authors, but Hungarian Transylvania, published in 1850 from John Paget, describes the supposed origins of the blood bathing and stuff like that. So that was like 250 years later. Yeah, it started. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, that's so. Here's where what kind of seems the more likely thing is that it's a conspiracy, essentially. I mean, this is a brutal time. Go back to the Transylvania or the Vlad episode 2. I think we mentioned his brother. We mentioned all sorts of crazy stuff. Like his brother had to help to take down Byzantium. Even he was a Christian forced to fight Christians and stuff like that. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on here. Tons of backstabbing, Machiavellianism, and what I see kind of in the bullet points is after the husband's death, while Bathory is powerful, she can't stop this dude Georgi Turzo. You think about it's the perfect little story of like, it's not the king, it's his little evil right hand guy or a Palatine. Come on, all Palatines are evil. So the Georgi Turzo, the magnate, entrusted with the heirs and widows of her husband Ferenich, and Turzo would lead the investigation against Bathory. He was in charge of her ex-husband, her belated husband's money and heirs and all that, and then leads to the investigation. So, and that's what happened was essentially was, so it was her and like 3 other servants were tried. Go figure, the 3 servants were tried and executed based off of just testimony. And there was no hard evidence essentially. And Bathory was put under house arrest. She wasn't actually even tried. Two court officials claimed to have seen Bathory herself kill young servant girls, but it was all just hearsay. It was all just word of mouth. There was no physical evidence. I mean, what could you have? Like, I was taking a selfie on my iPhone in the corner. You can see in this castle turret.
So there weren't bodies?
No mention of bodies, essentially. I mean, you'd have to think about how busy these places were. And I mean, like, when you go to the Hungarian countess's castle in Transylvania and she slaps a servant girl, you're not going to go, hey, don't do that. You know, like, you're just going to be
Sure.
like, that's what you do. This is 1600 Hungary. It's pretty crazy here. So yeah, it's just wild. I mean, another thing was too that the witnesses confessed under torture and would later be executed too. So some of the witnesses were literally forced to confess to these things happening, and then they were just killed off in the end. But and the crazy thing is, Bathory in the end, there was no official punishment for her. She was just put under house arrest and only made it about 4 years later after that. So it almost is definitely, I mean, and of course, once she's not in direct control, family members and other political rulers will come in and fill voids around the area. So it most certainly seems like it's something like that. Some authors suggest that it's a specific like Catholic Habsburg plot against the Protestant Bathory. There was a huge, Protestantism was big in this area, and there was a lot of give and take there in the lands of who was there. And Bathory was Protestant. I think she was raised Calvinist, actually. And so there was some motivation there. There's just some motivation, not a lot, and not a lot of evidence that really kind of points to any specific officials. But again, King of Hungary, the Georgi Terza magnate dude, it's just kind of wild. But yeah, the crazy thing though, like with the deep stuff, I mean, it's alleged that she killed anywhere between 300 to 600 people. Again, so we're just kind of throwing out numbers, but as many as 600 were sort of said. But the big stories, the retellings and the accounts wouldn't happen until 100 years later, and then the blood stuff didn't happen until after that. And that's kind of, like Vlad, we talked about, he's almost seen as like a national hero in Transylvania, like folklore-y kind of thing. Like I'm saying Hercules is a little weird, but like he's sort of a mythological figure. I mean, he kept the bad guys out, he kept the city strong, the state strong, and he was ruthless with his enemies and kept going from there. So the crazy stuff that kind of went later, like, oh, he drinks blood, you hear that? Like, I mean, it's I think it's just that your rulers get big, and especially in this time, the way information spreads, I think it's just that these rumors spread in just the same way. But it's really cool. I mean, she was an incredibly important and powerful woman. I'm honestly like, I wish we had an account. I would love it if we could have had some account from her, because I think it would have been amazing. So yeah, and Cammy, you started off, you sent me this paper. I didn't actually really scan the paper. It's huge, by Rachel Leigh Bledsaw. It's called No Blood in the Water: The Legal and Gender Conspiracies Against Countess Elizabeth Bathory in Historical Context. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a huge thesis, and it's just really interesting. Again, Bathory was really, she was a very tame person, sort of, if you kind of look at the abstract of it. She didn't, like, women don't really seem as threatening, even in royalty and things like that. But there's definitely like a conspiracy behind her. It's wild. So this paper also talks about the Habsburg threat. taking out, putting more Catholics in charge of places and things like that. And it looks like just the beatings were the deaths of servants were just kind of the wave that they rode to get her dislodged. But it's cool. Her paper goes off of tons of primary sources. There's some really cool old accounts of Hungary. The History of the Troubles of Hungary by Martin Fume, which was from 1600. So there's some really cool stuff literally from like the time period that Bloodsaw looked at just to kind of get her work. So I can link it in. The paper's available online, it looks like, in its entirety. But it was, so really, really cool. The story itself is pretty wild. It's really straightforward for the most part. We don't have any tangible evidence of her actually being this crazy killer. More than likely, it was just a huge plot to take down her position and move her out. Whether it was Habsburg, fueled, or even just, hey, your husband's gone and we got to start filling these positions, that kind of thing. So it's really interesting. I liked reading about this. There was a 2008 drama, a film as well. It looked like it was okay. I didn't really look too much into it.
Oh,
but
I think I watched that. It was.
Oh, really?
I think that's the one. Was it called Bathory?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's the one where she's like a lesbian countess, and then she's really a vampire, and she kills all these like virgin women and bathes in their blood. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. No, and there's I'll go over my sources too, since I'm pretty much done. The Britannica section was really cool. It was very like poignant. I mean, Britannica and Wikipedia were really helpful, of course. There's a lot. The Wikipedia section really goes in deep, and there's a lot of specific stuff. Again, there was a lot of court records to go through here, and that's what's really interesting. Is we do have all of these accounts of the servants confessing. It's really incredible. But I wish we had some really cool stuff from Bathory herself, because that would really just kind of tell all. But I'm guessing if there was, if she kept a diary the minute she croaked, she was 54. Yeah, she's 54 when she died. If the minute she croaked, they probably would have just burned everything and just been like, all right, moving on. So again, this area was a hugely contested. The Baltics today aren't the most stable place in the world, but it's just really cool to see like a really well documented, at least on one side, historical kind of crazy plot. It went to the mythical realm. Like with Vlad, there was no trial. There wasn't anything like that. He was a dude in the 15th century doing 15th century stuff. Meanwhile, but Bathory, it's so different. Even though it was like 120 years later or 30 years later, it's so different for her. Like Vlad, he kills 100 people, and it's just good old Vlad. Bathory, it's like, oh, we gotta depose her, but then they don't do anything. They don't want justice. They just want her,
they want power,
detained. They want to get a hold of her holdings in her estates and things like that. Yeah, it's really cool. But the last source, it's really fun. Bathory.org. It's great. It's an old website. It looks like it reminds me of like old just like really old websites,
like Angel Fire or something.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's
Bob
really
Dole, whatever cool. year he ran.
Yeah, all the tubes greening the internet. It's a cool little account of everything too. So it's really, really cool. It talks the from the Bathory.org, it doesn't really cite everything, but it says things like all records of Elizabeth were sealed for more than a century, and her name was forbidden to be spoken. I think it was just like, we have to. They wanted it was a huge. it was a political conspiracy because she was incredibly powerful. Again, uncle was king of Poland. Her family controlled Transylvania, and she married into a wealthy family. I don't think they were super royal, but they were wealthy enough to basically be royal. And so once they had once her husband died, that's when the pieces started going through, and probably through like the king of Hungary and then the magnate Palpatine guy, that's your way in for pegging her or knocking her down a peg. And then so she never went on trial, never went to jail, was just forced to live in a house for about 4 years until she died at 54. So Kind of sad, sadly. Oh, Cammy, though, that was a wonderful story. That
was some really interesting research too.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lot kinder than I imagined,
Right, and I think so. Like, yeah, I guess like I really need to look at that paper a little more. Because my kind of takeaway is right now is Bathory probably wasn't a saint. I just don't think she was on a murder spree either, because the evidence we do have of how she treated people.
She was no Vlad the Impaler.
No Vlad impaling people. And the evidence that we have of her interacting with people was helping like victims of war, So I think she was a noblewoman who acted in a way that would be pretty well. If she was Catholic, she probably would have been in a better spot, is probably what the case would have been. If the Habsburgs could have like remarried her in a better way, or she submitted to that, things probably would have gone better. If her husband didn't die, she probably would have been able to have a leg to stand on more than she did.
But we wouldn't have an episode, so
it's all fueling it. It all comes together. But no, it was great. Yeah, Cammy, this was a wonderful idea. Thanks for thinking of it. Everyone, I hope you guys enjoyed the story of Bathory. Take a look at that Vlad episode too. It's really fun. I think they complement each other really well. It's around the same time period and same area. So let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any suggestions for future topics. We've got one more episode coming up.
Very exciting.
The big one, Jack the Ripper, coming up. We're really excited. It'll be a lot of fun. We hope you guys enjoy it. We hope you've enjoyed this packed month of spooky stories, unsolved murder, crazy stuff, Transylvanian noblewomen. I think that's about it. Make sure you check. We've mentioned it. Our merchandise store is up on Threadless. Mythstorie, that's myth and story, all one word with an IE for story though. .threadless.com. You can check out what we've got. We've got some cool. Get a skateboard if you want, and tell people about Bathory, how she didn't do it. Yeah, I think that's it, right?
I think that's everything.
Awesome. Well, everyone, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Those are 3 words.
Instagram.
Oh, yeah. There we go. All right, everyone. We will see you next time.
Oh.